Yes, another video on the topic of IKEA kitchen islands. This one is special though, because in this video I am building a single row island using the new floor anchoring frame and connector rail system. Now, if you have the previous model of the island support bracket, or you're making some yourself by using some 2x4 and some heavy duty brackets, or you want the island to be floating, I can recommend you to take a look at one of these videos, which you can find on the playlist with all my kitchen island videos, and there's a link in the description. Let's get started. And here's a picture of the kitchen where we are putting in this small island. The picture is from the online planner, so it's a bit gray, but you can see the island right there. 2 cabinets only. And we start with step number 1, assembly of cabinets. Putting together cabinets for a single row island is not any different from putting together base cabinets for anywhere else in the kitchen. As you can see here, I'm throwing out those white distance pieces, and I never use those for any base cabinets, except if you have a double row island where you have cabinets back to back, then we use them. And those black plastic pieces which you use if you're not using the rail, they are going in the garbage as well. Since assembly of the cabinets is not very difficult, I'm not gonna let you sit through and watch me assemble a cabinet. Before I speed up though, I want to tell you that you can throw out those metal washers too, because we don't need those either. Let's just slow it down a bit here though, because you want to pay attention to where I put this bracket, because that's important for the single row island. You must use these 3 holes and not the other ones we normally use when we're hanging a cabinet on the rail. So pay attention to that. And as you will see now, I'm only putting the bracket on one side of the cabinet. And that's because when we get to the connector rail, we cannot put it on if we add both brackets. So on one side, it doesn't matter which one you put the bracket, but not on the other one. As you will notice in a second here is that I am assembling any cabinet differently than IKEA suggests. They want you to do it as you see in this drawing. I do not do it like that. I find it a lot easier just to build a cabinet as it is on my work table. So I start with one side of the cabinet. I put on the bottom of the cabinet and turn those twist locks. Then I put the back of the cabinet and the 2 metal pieces. These metal pieces are secured with use of these screws, and when we have put 2 of those on, we can add the last side of the cabinet, which is now coming on top, and then we turn the twist locks and we add another 2 screws from the metal pieces into the side of the cabinet. And with this done, we are ready to turn the cabinet around and put in some nails. The last thing we want to do is to put on some legs on this cabinet. And as I always do, I put 1 box of leg, and actually it's 2 boxes of legs now, because now there's only 2 legs in 1 box. So 4 legs on each cabinet, 6 or 8 if it's the corner. And when we have a single row island, we put 4 legs on each cabinet. Next step is to put on what IKEA call the connector rail, and that is something new for the island kit. The purpose of this connector rail is basically just to be able to, for a single row cabinet, secure the back panel to the cabinet, and for a double row island is to be able to connect the 2 rows of cabinets that are sitting back to back with each other. There's 2 in a box, and we need only 1 for each cabinet. The first thing we do is to cut them to length, and here it is important that you cut off the correct end of that rail, because they are not symmetrical. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm checking to see whether we have that hole in the rail lining up with the bracket inside the cabinet, because that's important. And if you cut off the wrong end of that connector rail, you will only have 1 hole lining up. So try to change it around to see, if I cut off this end of the rail, will the hole for both ends line up? It's very easy. You just need to make sure that you're not cutting off the wrong end. When they have been cut off, you can put the rail on the cabinet. And this is exactly why we only put one bracket on the side of the cabinet when we were assembling the cabinet, because the rail is sitting inside the footprint of the cabinet. So it's kind of tucked inside at the back of the cabinet. And we cannot put it in there unless one of the brackets has not been mounted. So what you do is you simply put the bracket on that connector rail and push the other end of the connector rail into the bracket that is mounted on the cabinet already. And then you line up the first loose bracket and secure it to the cabinet with the 3 screws. And then you're completely done with the connector rail. Now it's time to put the cabinets on the floor where you want the island to be. And you want to be fairly accurate. We are doing some adjustments later, but you want to make sure that you put it as close as to the final position as possible. As you can see, the island in this situation is placed up in the corner of the area of the kitchen that is tiled. So it is fairly important that the island is sitting in the right position. But as I said before, I will do some final adjustments with the panel when the cabinets has been tied together. At this point in time, you do not screw the cabinet together because they have to come off again when we are securing the anchor frame. Step number 4 is assembly of the anchor frame. And the anchor frame is the frame that is sitting under the cabinets and is securing the cabinets to the floor. So it is important that we use this item. Otherwise, your island will be all wobbly and be able to move around on your kitchen floor. And of course, we don't want that to happen. As with any other IKEA product, they are providing you with an assembly instruction. And that's also the case for the anchoring frame. But I got to tell you that in this case, I am not using the instruction much. And I will get to that a bit later, where my way of installing the island with this anchor frame is different from how IKEA is doing it. Before we assembled the anchor frame, we had to cut the longest part of it to the correct length. And the length is decided by whether you have panels running all the way to the floor or panels that are flush with the bottom of the cabinet right there. And if it's the latter, then the anchor frame has to be shorter than if the panels are running to the floor. And that's because we'll have a toe kick at the each end of the island. So the anchor frame cannot be protruding where the position of the legs are. In the instruction that comes with the anchor frame, you can see how much shorter the anchor frame has to be compared to the island cabinets. But IKEA is not very strong on fractions. So instead of using those numbers, you just take the complete length of your island and subtract 12 inches or about 35 centimeters. And you will have the length of the anchor frame in the situation where the panels are flush with the bottom of the cabinet. If the panels are running all the way to the floor, you can make the anchor frame as long as the cabinets, just shy a centimeter, half an inch, something like that. Just not protruding the total length of the island. In my case here, the panels will be running all the way to the floor. I do that most of the time on islands. But in this case, I certainly do it because I want the panels to be standing exactly where the tiles on the floor is meeting the wood on the floor. As you can see right there in the corner, we got tiles meeting wood. So that's where my panels, that's where I want my panels to be. So that's why I can cut these pieces for the anchor frame to a length that is just shorter than the entire length of the cabinet. With the pieces for the anchor frame cut to the right length, it's time to assemble the anchor frame. And what I do is I put in those little feet so the total length of that piece of wood and the foot sticking out is about 4.5 inches. And this is for the section cabinet. And you can see it in this drawing as well. We got 4.5 inches, which is the total height of the anchor frame, with the feet protruding right there under the frame. The same goes for the method frame that you use in Europe and other regions, where the total height of the leg is only 80 millimeters. And that means in this case, the total height of the frame with the leg is only 80 millimeters. The procedure is the same. It's only the measurement that is different. With the small legs in place, you can start putting the anchor frame together, and it's very easy. You simply take those long screws that come with the anchor frame and you build a rectangular shape like you see me doing here. Nothing to it. Anyone can do it. You can easily do it with the Allen key that is provided, or if you have a bit to put in your drill, you can use that as well. Next step is to secure the anchor frame to the floor under the cabinets, and I simply do that by pushing the anchor frame from one end of the island under the cabinets. And I do that because I want to get down on my knees and position that frame exactly where I want it, and then mark on the floor where I want to drill holes through the tiles so I can secure the anchor frame to the floor. As you can see, I'm doing this with a little help from the dog of this home. His name is Wyatt. He's a very cute dog. If this was a wooden floor, I could use my 90-degree angle attachment to my drill and secure it into the floor without removing the cabinets. But since it's tiles, I need to make some holes. So I put the frame in and I position it exactly where I want it. And I do pay a bit of attention to this because I want to make sure that it's sitting symmetrically under the cabinet, so I have the same distance to each side, the front and the back, and both ends. When I'm happy with the position of the anchor frame under the cabinets, and I have marked with my pencil around those small feet on the anchor frame on the floor, I can take the cabinets away, because now I'm ready to secure the anchor frame into the floor. And as I mentioned before, this is a tile floor, so I have to take the cabinets away. Otherwise, I cannot drill through the tiles. And at this point, I have not put the brackets on yet. This is the brackets that are the connecting point between the anchoring frame and the floor. They are screwed into the side of the anchor frame and into the floor. The anchor frame kit comes with 6 brackets, so I will put 3 brackets on each side of the frame. What I do now is I put them next to the frame and I mark on the floor where I want to drill the holes. And when I'm ready to drill, I will bring out my diamond covered drill bit that will go through these tiles like it was a hot knife in butter. I can highly recommend getting some of those if you have to drill holes in tiles. With holes drilled on one side of the frame, I will clean up a bit and then I will secure those brackets into the floor. And I'm using a screw very similar to the one I'm using when I'm hanging suspension rail. A big, nice, flat head and a good grip into wood. And that's what I need. These are just shorter than the ones I use for suspension rails. These are about 1.5 inches, as I remember. Maybe shorter. No, 1.5 inches. And with one side of the frame done, I can move on to the other side and do the exact same thing. Drill holes through the tiles into the plywood and secure the brackets with screws. Now we are getting to the point in the installation where we can put the cabinet back on top of the anchor frame. This is where I'm doing it a bit differently than Ikea, because Ikea would like you to level that frame as it is, sitting on the floor, and then put the screws through those brackets sideways into the anchor frame when everything is level. And I tried that and it didn't work that well, because guess what? When the cabinet got up there, it was not that level after all. And that's because IKEA think that the cabinet boxes are just super perfect. They're all square, they have the same height and absolutely identical. But guess what? They are not. So if you have that frame all leveled out and you put the cabinets up, it is not as level as I want it to be. And that's why I'm doing it differently. So what I'm doing is I put the cabinets on top of that frame, basically in the same way I did with the old Island kit, because now I can put the cabinets up I can secure the cabinets to each other, as you see. And when that is done, I can position my cabinets exactly where I want it, on top of that frame, with reference to the floor. Now, after the cabinet has been screwed to each other, I will bring out my level and I will just do a quick leveling, just to be sure that it's fairly level before I put my laser on it. And I do that by adjusting the legs. At this point in time, the island has not been secured into the anchor frame yet. So it's a good thing that we will just check that it's fairly level before we move on. Maybe you're wondering why I don't start with the laser right away, and I think it's just a habit I have. And as you know, habits can be hard to break. So here I am with my laser. You can not see the laser itself, but you can see a green line on the wall, and I have my little target that I put on top of the corners of the cabinet, like I do with any base cabinets. And then I adjust the legs once again to make sure that the whole island is absolutely level. Step number 8 is very easy, because now we just want to lift up the anchor frame so it's sitting really tight up under the bottom of the cabinets. And we're doing that by adjusting the small legs sitting under the anchor frame and pushing the anchor frame upwards towards the cabinets. The reason for doing this is that when we're securing the cabinets to the anchor frame, we do not have to pull up the anchor frame with the screws. No, it's sitting there already. So we have a good connection between the cabinets and the anchor frame, and that's important. Before I secure the cabinets to the anchor frame, I do one last check to see if the cabinets are sitting in the right position. And for that, I'm using a piece of panel, because I want the panel to come down and be exactly where the tile meets the wood. Now I take my drill and I take the long screws that comes with the anchor frame, and I drill holes where the frame is sitting under the cabinet. And as you can see here, I'm using my measuring tape to measure how far from the front of the cabinet the anchor frame is sitting. Then I'm adding 3/4 of an inch or an inch, and then I drill holes inside the cabinet. And I put 4 screws in each cabinet. 2 screws in the piece of wood that is sitting closest to me, and another 2 that is sitting in the other long piece of wood under the cabinets. And those 2 screws are sitting about 10 inches apart, because that's the distance from center to center for those 2 pieces of anchor frame. The last thing we need to do before we're ready to put panels on this island is to take the shorter screws from the anchor frame kit and secure the anchor frame to the brackets, which are already secured into the floor. So this is the last step we do to ensure that the island is securely attached to the floor. If you take a quick look into the instructions, which I did not do, you will see that Ikea recommend that you use 4 screws through each bracket. Now that the island is done, all we have to do is put on the panels. And cutting the panels is done in the exact same way as I did it with the older island kit. But securing the back panel to the cabinets is where the difference is. So that's where we are starting. The first panel I cut is the back panel, and I cut it about 1/8 of an inch. That's 2-3 millimeters longer than the total length of the island. And I do that because I do not want to risk that it is too short. And that can happen if the sides of the island cabinets are not totally parallel to each other. It can happen. The cabinet boxes are not as perfect as Ikea would like them to be. So I don't want to come up short with this panel, so I cut it a tiny bit longer than the total length of the island. As you may know already, I never cut a panel at the floor because I don't want it to be an opportunity for moisture to come in and ruin the panel. I always cut at the top. So when I'm cutting at the top, it means that sometimes the panel is not sitting on the floor at both ends if the floor is not horizontal. And I think that is a better way of doing it than cutting the panel at the floor. In this case, I can see that the distance from the panel to the cabinet top is not the same at both ends. So before I measure that distance, I put in a little shim to lift up the cabinet where it is sitting too low. Now I can check at both ends that my panel is protruding the cabinets a tiny bit, as I mentioned before. Perfect. And when that is done, and I had my little chat with Wyatt, I can go get my ruler and I can measure from the cabinet top to the top of the panel. And if I have the same distance at both ends of that panel, that means that now my panel is horizontal. I have shimmed to the right height. And it means I can measure exactly how much I need to cut off. I could also put a level just to make sure on top of the panel to see that it's sitting absolutely level. But if I have the same distance, now I measure in the middle too, but if I have the same distance where the cabinet is sitting at both ends of that panel, I know that the panel is horizontal. And I know exactly how much to cut off. So in this case, I'm not getting the exact same measurement at both ends, so I need to adjust my shim a little bit. See, I pull it out because I had lifted it up a little bit too high, and then I can check again with my ruler to see I have the same distance. And we are still good at both ends. I think so, yeah. One final check. I like to check. I like to double check. I like to triple check. I like to make sure that it's good because you know what? Cutting the panel wrong is just such a pain because I have to drive to Ikea and spend $200 getting a new one, and I really like to avoid that. So with those measurements in mind, I am ready to cut the panel. I just need one final act of mercy. Yep, make room for Wyatt so he can get out and to his business. Now that the back panel has been cut in the height and the length, we are ready to attach the panel to the cabinet. And for doing just that, we need some of the parts that came with the connector rail. And the ones I have marked in this picture are the one you're going to pick out of that bag. So the first parts we will use are these. We take the small screws and the tiny little bracket. And the idea with this bracket is that it will hold the panel towards the cabinet at the bottom. We will have a screw at the top, but at the bottom it will only be hanging on this hook. Because this little bracket is so thin, it will fit right into that groove we have for the back panel at the bottom of the cabinet. The position of this little bracket depends on whether your panels are running to the floor or will be flush with the bottom of the cabinet. What I'm doing here is I'm measuring from the floor up to the cabinet. I just want to make sure that I have the standard height, which is 4.5 inches, as you can see here, because that determines the position of that little bracket when my panels are running to the floor. And here's another picture showing pretty much what I just said, but I just want to highlight that the drawing here to the left is when you have panels flush with the cabinets, and that is the option available for section and method as well. If you have section cabinets, which is the one we have here in North America, you can have the panels running all the way to the floor because we do have those panels on the market, but on the method market you don't have that panel available unless you take one of the higher panels that are 2 meter or 40 or something, and then you can use them at the back, and then they can go all the way to the floor, and then you just need to measure from the floor up to the top of the bottom of the cabinet so you know where to put that bracket. I know it sounds complicated, but it's not. Just follow the drawing I am showing you right here. And now it's time to put on those brackets. So to repeat myself, the first thing I do here is to measure 5.5 inches from the bottom of the cabinet and up where I want to put that little bracket. And that is where the screw is going, 4.5 inches. When I've done that, I can even them out over the width of the cabinet. and start attaching them. And I always use everything I have in the bag. And in this case, I have 6 brackets and 6 screws. So I put 6 brackets across the panel to have the best possible attachment to the cabinet. And this is how it looks when the little bracket has been mounted onto the panel. And here I'm just finishing up. I have done the first 4 and now I just do the last 2, and we have all 6 brackets attached to the panel, and we are ready to put the panel on the back of the island. And that is simply done. After a little bit of cleanup, we can take the panel and we can lift it over to the back, and then we will have all those small brackets shaped like hooks lined up with the back of the cabinet, and we will lift it up a bit and put it into place. I'm certain that those small brackets are sufficient to hold the panel in place if your floor is not horizontal. But that requires that those brackets are sitting at the exact precise location. And I don't think that's possible. By that I mean that the brackets will hold the panel towards the cabinet, but will the brackets stop the panel from moving towards the floor? I don't think so, because as you can imagine, then the bracket has to be sitting at the exact precise height on the panel, right? If the floor is not horizontal. So what I do is I put my little shim back under the cabinet if the floor is not horizontal, until I have added a few screws on the top. And what I actually do is I leave the shim in place and I trim it back and I give it a little push eventually, so you cannot see it, but I want to keep it under that panel in order for the panel to have support at both ends. As you can see now, I've moved on to securing the panel to the cabinets at the very top. And for that, I use this screw that comes in the bag as well, together with the washer. You see that too. And it's important that you pick that screw exactly and not something else. And it's important that you put on the washer, because if you pick the wrong screw and you don't use the washer, there's a big chance that that screw will go right through that connector rail sitting at the top of the cabinet and poke through your panel on the back. And we really don't want that to happen, because then again you have to go back to Ikea and get a new panel for another $200. So it can be fairly expensive for you to install this kitchen if you don't pay attention to the small things. This is how it's going to sit, and you can see you can put a screw in each end of the connector rail at the bracket, but you can also, and I didn't show you that, but you can also, before you put that panel on, drill holes from the outside of the connector rail through the back panel of the cabinet, so you know exactly where to put a few additional screws to secure that panel. If you forget to do that, like I did, you can just drill a hole through the connector rail and a little bit into the panel and put in the same screw as I just showed you. And then your panel will be securely tightened. And now we are finally ready to put the panels on the end of the island. And the panel I use for this is 26 inches wide and 36 inches high. And I do know that this panel is not available on all markets, but I can only show you how I do things with whatever panels we have available on the market I work in. So if you don't have this panel, you have to find a way using whatever is available. I don't understand Ikea do not have the same panels everywhere, because an island is an island, and I certainly think you need this panel, but I cannot help you with that. So I will use the panel you see in the video. And what I've done here is I put the panel up as it is out of the package next to the island, and then again I measure how much I have to cut off this panel, and I only cut at the top. I don't cut at the bottom, and I certainly don't cut at the sides. Here I'm putting a level on, and that's clearly to make sure that this panel is sitting level. If it's not, I have to shim it again. But in this case, it's very horizontal, and I can measure how much I want to cut off that panel. And with those measurements in mind, I can once again run outside and cut off my panel. Yeah, which one should I cut? Here you go, I cut it off. And I am ready to attach that panel to the cabinet. I put on a clamp, and then I make sure that the cabinet is sitting exactly where I want it. I have my little tool for checking. And if you want to see what that is, you can check the description of this video. I will put a link in there. And when I'm absolutely happy with the position, I can add some screws from the inside. And if you use the screws that are provided with either the panel or the cabinet, the same screws we use for securing the cabinets to each other, you will make sure that those screws do not poke through the panel, because as you know, we don't want that to happen. I normally add 6 screws, 3 at the front and 3 at the back. And when I'm done one, I move on to the next panel. And that one I'm doing in the exact same way as I did the first one. And I could skip forward, but I don't want to do that because there's something I like to show you. And that is when the panel is cut and you bring it in and you start putting screws into from the inside of the cabinet. You want to make absolutely sure that at the back of the cabinet that you are not pushing the panel away from the cabinet. And I do that by taking a piece of cardboard so I don't scratch the panel, and then I put my foot down firmly towards the panel. And I do that to make sure that the panel is not being pushed away from the cabinet when I put in the screws from the inside. So I recommend doing that as well. Once again, I put 6 screws into the panel from the inside of the cabinet, 3 at the back there and 3 at the front. 1 at the bottom, 1 in the middle, and 1 at the top. And when that is done, Island is absolutely complete and finished. I hope you're still with me, and if you are, here's a few other videos that might be of interest to you if you are about to install your own IKEA kitchen. Thank you for watching.